What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest action stars sits down for what should be a routine interview and ends up in the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history? Today, we're diving into the shocking moment when Arnold Schwarzenegger was literally kicked off The View after an absolutely brutal clash with Joy Behar that left the entire studio in stunned silence. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a full-scale verbal warfare that exposed the ugly side of celebrity interviews. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity interviews gone wrong. The morning started like any other at the View studios. Arnold Schwarzenegger had arrived early, looking every bit the Hollywood legend in his perfectly tailored navy suit. He was there to promote his latest memoir, and what should have been a straightforward book promotion was about to turn into television history. Joy Behar was in her dressing room going through her research notes with an intensity that her colleagues had learned to recognize. She had been particularly vocal about her disagreements with Arnold's political past, and those close to the show knew she had been preparing for this interview for weeks. When the camera started rolling, everything seemed normal. Whoopi Goldberg introduced Arnold with her usual warmth, and the audience gave him a standing ovation. He waved, flashed that famous smile, and took his seat at the table. "Arnold, welcome back to The View," Whoopi said warmly. "It's great to have you here." "Thank you, Whoopi. Always a pleasure to be here," Arnold replied, his Austrian accent adding charm to his words. Tsunami host jumped in next. "So, tell us about this new book. What made you want to write another memoir?" Arnold leaned forward slightly. "Well, Sonny, after everything I've experienced in bodybuilding, movies, and politics, I felt like I had some lessons to share. Stories about overcoming obstacles, about the power of having a clear vision." "That's interesting," Sarah Haynes added. "What would you say was your biggest obstacle?" "You know, Sarah, people always expect me to say it was my accent or being an immigrant. But honestly, my biggest obstacle was always myself, learning to get out of my own way to trust the process." Joy had been unusually quiet during this opening segment, sitting there with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, tapping her pen against her notes. The other hosts seemed to sense something was brewing. Then came the moment that changed everything. Whoopi had just asked Arnold about his proudest achievement when Joy suddenly leaned forward and interrupted. "Arnold, let's talk about your real legacy," Joy said, her tone dripping with barely concealed disdain. "You left California in worse shape than when you found it. How do you justify writing a book about success when your political career was such a spectacular failure?" The studio fell silent. Arnold's smile faded slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Joy, I think you might want to check your facts there. California faced some of the worst economic challenges in its history during my time in office." Joy wasn't backing down. She shuffled through her papers dramatically. "Oh, I have my facts right here, Arnold. Unemployment in California went from 7.4% when you took office to 12.5% when you left. These aren't opinions. These are numbers." Arnold's jaw tightened slightly. "Joy, you're taking those numbers completely out of context. We were dealing with a global financial crisis. What you're not mentioning is that we reformed the workers' compensation system and made California a leader in environmental protection." "Environmental protection." Joy's voice rose incredulously. "This is coming from a man who drove Hummers everywhere and lived in a mansion that probably had a bigger carbon footprint than most small towns. Don't you think it's a little hypocritical?" The other hosts were trying to jump in, but Joy was on a roll, and Arnold was starting to show signs that his patience was wearing thin. His famous accent became more pronounced. "You know what, Joy?" Arnold said, his voice still controlled, but with an edge. "I think what we have here is someone who is more interested in creating drama than having an actual conversation. I came here to talk about my book, and instead you want to play go-to politics." Joy's eyes flashed. "What I don't understand is how someone can fail so spectacularly at their job and then have the audacity to write a book telling other people how to succeed. It's like getting advice on marriage from someone who's been divorced 3 times. That comment hit below the belt. Arnold's personal life had been tabloid fodder for years, and bringing it up was crossing a line. Arnold's face darkened. "That's enough," Arnold said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone is trying to make a name for themselves by tearing down others. You want to attack my policies, fine. But when you start attacking my family and my personal life, that's where I draw the line." Joy leaned back with a satisfied smirk. "I'm not attacking your family, Arnold. I'm pointing out that maybe someone who couldn't keep their own house in order shouldn't be giving advice to others. It's called accountability. The tension in the studio was thick. The audience was completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Arnold stood up slowly, his 6 feet 2 inches frame imposing. You know what your problem is, Joy? You've spent so much time sitting behind this desk throwing stones that you've forgotten what it's like to actually be in the arena. It's easy to criticize when you've never had to make the hard decisions. Joy wasn't intimidated. Oh, please don't give me that arena speech. You were a movie star who bought his way into politics with name recognition and flashy promises. You thought governing was going to be as easy as reading lines from a script. At least I tried to do something meaningful with my life. Arnold shot back, his voice rising for the first time. At least I didn't spend my entire career sitting in a chair making jokes about people who are actually out there trying to make a difference. What have you ever built, Joy? What's your legacy going to be besides snarky comments? Joy's face flushed red with anger. My legacy? My legacy is calling out phonies like you who think they can buy their way into positions of power and then act like they are some kind of hero when they fail miserably. At least I'm honest about what I do. Arnold laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Honest? You call ambushing a guest with personal attacks honest journalism? This isn't journalism, Joy. This is tabloid garbage dressed up as legitimate television. Don't you dare lecture me about journalism. You muscle-bound has been. Joy snapped back. I've been asking tough questions since before you knew what a teleprompter was. Just because you can't handle being challenged doesn't mean I'm going to throw you softball questions. Arnold's eyes narrowed dangerously. Has been. Let me tell you something, Joy. I've accomplished more in my worst year than you have in your entire career. I've built businesses. I've entertained millions of people. I've served in public office. What have you done besides sit here and tear down people? Joy stood up to match Arnold's height, though she was still dwarfed by his presence. You want to know what I've done? I've held people like you accountable. I've made sure that the public sees through the PR spin. Behind all the muscles and the movie star smile, you're just another politician who promised everything and delivered nothing. Arnold's hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, it looked like the situation might turn physical. The security guards tensed, ready to intervene. You know what, Joy? Arnold said, his voice deadly calm. I think we're done here. I came here to have a civilized conversation about my book, but instead, I walked into an ambush by someone who is more interested in creating conflict than having a meaningful discussion. Joy wasn't about to let him have the last word. Oh, now you're the victim. Poor Arnold. He can't handle a few tough questions, so he's going to run away. Is this how you handled criticism when you were governor? Arnold turned back to face Joy with a look that could have melted steel. I never ran away from anything in my life, Joy. But I also never wasted my time arguing with people who are more interested in scoring cheap points than finding solutions. Joy's response was swift and cutting. And you failed spectacularly at it. At least I'm good at what I do. You couldn't even be a successful politician in a state where movie stars practically get elected by default. Face it, Arnold. You're a failed governor trying to rewrite history. That was the final straw. Arnold's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than if he had been shouting. You know what, Joy? I've met bullies before. But what I've never encountered is someone who is so fundamentally bitter and angry that they can't even have a civil conversation with a guest on their own show. That's not strength, that's weakness. Joy's face went white with rage. Get out, she said through gritted teeth. Get out of my studio right now. I don't have to sit here and listen to some washed-up action star tell me how to do my job. Security escort Mr. Schwarzenegger out of the building. The studio erupted in chaos. The other hosts were shouting over each other, trying to restore order. The audience was gasping in shock. Arnold straightened his tie and smiled that famous smile, but there was no warmth in it. Don't worry, Joy. I wouldn't want to stay somewhere where I'm not welcome. But before I go, let me leave you with this thought. You can attack my record. You can question my motives. But at the end of the day, I'll go home knowing that I tried to make a difference in the world, while you'll go home knowing that you spent your day trying to tear someone down. As Arnold began to step away from the table, something unexpected happened. The studio audience, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly erupted in applause. Not polite television applause, but genuine thunderous clapping that echoed through the studio. Several people in the front row actually stood up, showing their support for Arnold and their disapproval of Joy's behavior. Joy's face turned an even deeper shade of red as she realized the audience was clearly on Arnold's side. Sit down, she barked at the audience. This isn't about taking sides. This is about holding people accountable. But Arnold stopped walking. The audience reaction seemed to give him a second wind, and he slowly turned back to face Joy. You know what, Joy? I think I'm going to stay a little longer. These people came here to see a show, and it seems like they're enjoying themselves. Whoopi tried desperately to regain control. Arnold, Joy, let's all just take a breath here. And maybe we can get back to talking about the book. No, Whoopi, Arnold said, his voice firm but not aggressive. I think Joy and I need to finish this conversation. She clearly has some things she wants to get off her chest, and I think the audience deserves to hear both sides. Joy was visibly frustrated that her attempt to kick Arnold out had backfired. Fine, if you want to stay and embarrass yourself further, be my guest, but don't expect me to go easy on you just because you're having a tantrum. Arnold chuckled and sat back down completely. Relax now. A tantrum? Joy, I'm the calmest person in this room right now. You're the one who's been shouting and demanding that security remove me. If anyone's having a tantrum, it's you. The observation was so obviously true that even Sarah Haynes couldn't hide a small smile. Joy noticed and shot her a withering look before turning back to Arnold. Let's talk about your movie career, then, Joy said, clearly trying to find new ammunition. You made millions playing characters who solved everything with violence, and then you want people to take you seriously as a politician and an author. Don't you think there's a disconnect there? Arnold leaned back in his chair, completely in his element now. Joy, I think you're confusing fantasy with reality. Those were movies, entertainment. But if you want to talk about my characters, let's talk about what they actually represented. They were about never giving up, about fighting for what's right, about protecting the innocent. Those are pretty good values, don't you think? They were about shooting first and asking questions later, Joy retorted. They were about solving complex problems with simple violence. That's not leadership. That's just mindless action. You know what, Joy? I think you've been watching too many of my movies, Arnold said with a grin that got another laugh from the audience. Most of my characters were actually trying to save the world, not destroy it. The Terminator protected Sarah Connor. Conan fought against tyranny. Dutch and Predator was trying to save his team. These weren't mindless killers. They were heroes. Joy wasn't amused. Heroes. They were cartoon characters with guns. And somehow that qualified you to run the fifth largest economy in the world. Do you see how ridiculous that sounds? What sounds ridiculous to me, Arnold replied, is someone who makes a living talking about other people's work, criticizing someone who actually created something. You want to talk about qualifications. What qualified you to sit behind this desk and judge everyone else? Did you go to journalism school? Did you ever run for office? Did you ever build a business? The question hit home, and Joy's defensive response made it clear that Arnold had touched a nerve. I don't need to run for office to know when someone is failing at their job. I don't need to build a business to recognize when someone is making bad decisions. That's what critics do, Arnold. We hold people accountable. But there's a difference between constructive criticism and just tearing people down. Arnold said, a good critic doesn't just point out what's wrong. They offer solutions. They try to make things better. All I've heard from you today is negativity and personal attacks. Where are your solutions, Joy? Where are your ideas for making things better? Joy was getting flustered. My job isn't to solve problems. My job is to point out when people aren't solving them. My job is to ask the tough questions that other people won't ask. But you're not asking tough questions, Arnold said, his voice rising slightly. You're just making accusations and hoping something sticks. A tough question would be about policy details, about specific decisions I made and why I made them. What you're doing is just character assassination. The other hosts were trying to jump in, but both Arnold and Joy were too focused on each other to pay attention. Tsunami host tried to redirect the conversation. Arnold, let's talk about your book. What's the main message you want readers to take away? But Joy wasn't finished. The main message is that if you're rich and famous enough, you can fail upward and still convince people you're a success. That's the real message of this book. Arnold's patience was wearing thin again. You know what, Joy? I think you're projecting. I think you're talking about your own career, not mine. Because the truth is, I've earned everything I've achieved. I didn't inherit my success. I didn't marry into it. I didn't get it handed to me because of my connections. I worked for it. Worked for it. Joy's voice was getting shrill. You worked for it. You were a bodybuilder who got lucky and became a movie star. Then used that fame to become a politician. That's not work. That's just being in the right place at the right time. Arnold stood up again, but this time his movement was more controlled. Lucky Joy. Do you have any idea what it takes to become Mr. Olympia 7 times? Do you know what it takes to learn English well enough to become a movie star? Do you know what it takes to win a gubernatorial election in California? None of that was luck. It was years of dedication and hard work. Joy stood up to match him. And what did you do with all that hard work? You left California worse than you found it. You made promises you couldn't keep. You proved that being famous doesn't make you qualified to govern. At least I tried. Arnold shot back. At least I put myself out there and tried to make a difference. You just sit here every day and complain about people who are actually trying to do something. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines. Joy. It's a lot harder to actually get in the game. The confrontation had reached another boiling point. The audience was completely engaged. Some of them shouting encouragement to Arnold, others trying to get Joy to back down. The energy in the studio was electric, and everyone knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Joy's final response was delivered with venom. You know what, Arnold? You're right. I do sit here and criticize people. And you know why? Because people like you need to be criticized. People like you think you can coast on your fame and your charm and your movie star smile and nobody will call you out on your failures. Well, I'm calling you out right now. Arnold's response was swift and devastating. And I'm calling you out too, Joy. I'm calling you out for being a bitter, angry person who has nothing positive to contribute to the world. You're not making anything better. You're just making everything worse. And the saddest part is you seem to enjoy it. End of chapter 8. The studio was at a fever pitch. Joy's face was flushed with rage, and Arnold was standing his ground like the action hero he once played on screen. The other hosts had given up trying to restore order and were simply watching in fascination as two titans of television battled it out. You want to talk about enjoying things? Joy spat back. You enjoyed being governor so much that you couldn't wait to get back to Hollywood. You enjoyed the spotlight. You enjoyed the power, but you sure didn't enjoy the actual work of governing. That's why you failed. Arnold's laugh was cold and humorless. Failed. Joy. I balanced a budget that was $40 billion in the red. I reformed a workers' compensation system that was driving businesses out of the state. I rebuilt our infrastructure and made California a leader in renewable energy. If that's failure, I'd hate to see what you consider success. Success. Joy's voice cracked slightly. Success is not leaving your state with higher unemployment than when you started. Success is not having to resort to borrowing money just to keep the government running. Success is not being so unpopular that your own party won't support you. The personal nature of the attack seemed to unleash something in Arnold. His voice dropped to that menacing whisper again. You know what, Joy? I think we've identified the real problem here. You're not angry about my record as governor. You're angry about your own irrelevance. You're angry that while I was out there trying to make a difference, you were stuck behind this desk making jokes about people who were actually accomplishing things. Joy's eyes blazed with fury. Irrelevance. I've been on television longer than you've been in politics. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners. Don't you dare talk to me about relevance. But what have you done with all those interviews? Arnold pressed. What have you accomplished? What problems have you solved? What lives have you improved? You've had access to all these powerful people. And what do you have to show for it? A reputation for being difficult and a career built on controversy. The accusation hit Joy like a physical blow. How dare you? How dare you question my career? I've informed the public. I've held politicians accountable. I've given voice to people who don't have a platform. That's more than you ever did as governor. Arnold shook his head sadly. Inform the public. Joy, you don't inform people. You inflame them. You don't hold politicians accountable. You just attack them. And you don't give voice to people. You just amplify your own voice. There's a difference between journalism and what you do. What I do. Joy was practically screaming now. What I do is ask the questions that need to be asked. What I do is make sure that people like you don't get away with smooth talking your way out of responsibility. What I do is real journalism, not the fluff pieces that most people get when they come on these shows. Arnold's response was devastating in its simplicity. No, Joy. What you do is bully people. What you do is try to make yourself feel important by tearing other people down. What you do is create conflict where none needs to exist. And what you do is give journalism a bad name. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the other hosts seemed mesmerized by the intensity of the confrontation. Joy was visibly shaking with rage, and Arnold was completely calm, which somehow made him seem even more dangerous. You know what? Joy said, her voice barely controlled. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. I don't have to take lectures from someone who thinks being in movies makes him qualified to run a government security. I want him out of here now. But Arnold wasn't finished. There you go again, Joy. Running away from the conversation when it gets uncomfortable. Calling security when you can't win the argument. Is this how you handle all your problems? By trying to silence anyone who disagrees with you? Joy turned to the security guards who had moved closer to the set. I said, get him out of here. This interview is over. Arnold looked at the security guards and then back at Joy. You know what? I'll leave, but not because you're throwing me out. I'll leave because I've said what I came here to say, and I think the audience has seen exactly what kind of person you really are. He started to walk away, but then turned back one final time. You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy? You could have been great. You have intelligence. You have a platform. You have influence. But instead of using those gifts to make the world better, you chose to use them to make it worse. And that's something you'll have to live with. Joy's final response was pure venom. Don't you dare pity me, Arnold. Don't you dare stand there and act like you're somehow better than me. You're a failed politician trying to rehabilitate your image with a book tour. I'm a successful broadcaster who's been doing this job for decades. We are not the same. Arnold smiled that famous smile one last time. You're absolutely right, Joy. We are not the same, and thank God for that. With that, Arnold Schwarzenegger walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a studio in chaos and a host who had just experienced the most brutal verbal takedown in daytime television history. The audience sat in stunned silence as the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of Joy's humiliation. The other hosts tried desperately to restore some sense of normalcy, but the damage was done. Joy sat at the table, her face red with anger and embarrassment while Whoopi attempted to segue to a commercial break. But everyone knew that nothing would ever be the same after this explosive confrontation. Arnold's final words echoed through the studio as he disappeared behind the cameras, leaving Joy to face the aftermath of a battle she had started but definitively lost. The audience began to murmur among themselves, many of them clearly sympathizing with Arnold and questioning Joy's behavior. As the show finally cut to commercial, the studio remained electric with tension. Joy sat rigidly at the table, refusing to acknowledge the other hosts' attempts to comfort her. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. A confrontation that would be talked about for years. But she had also gotten something she didn't expect. A complete and total defeat at the hands of someone who had proven himself to be far more formidable than she had anticipated. The explosive clash between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Joy Behar had come to an end. But the shock waves would reverberate through television history. Arnold had been kicked off The View. But in the process, he had exposed Joy Behar as the bitter, angry person that many had long suspected her to be. And in doing so, he had delivered one of the most devastating takedowns in the history of daytime television. So, what do you think about this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity interview go this wrong? Let me know in the comments below.